I wouldn't consider calling myself a chef unless I had a Red Seal certificate that labeled me chef, which is like you have to work 10,000 hours.
1, 2, 3.
Perfect.
So the last pod we spoke about a little bit of things that you like. We didn't really get into who you really are. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell the people who you are?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was adopted from Mexico as a kid, and my given name was Rodrigo de Rivera. Rodrigo Nuno de Rivera. And that was my birth name. So when I was adopted at the age of 8 months old, which is interesting that my parents left Toronto to adopt me on St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that might have tipped the cow over, but it wasn't the main reason why they decided to call me Pat, you know? So yeah, I moved to Toronto. My parents are Canadian. Man, I grew up speaking French. We have a huge French-Canadian side to my family, which is actually a massive proponent to why I'm so hospitality oriented. My mom has 10 brothers and sisters, and whenever we would go to my grandma's in the country, it was always like, I used to call it un grand festin, which means a massive feast, because we would have a massive table. It was all about hosting and food and getting together and laughing and playing practical jokes, and like food was the epicenter of that, you know? So that really primed me a lot on that one side. I grew up here in Toronto, and man, I've always just had like a massive attraction to food.
From a young age, as a baby, man, I loved eating. I was so chubby as a kid. My parents took me to the doctor to see if I was like obese for my size.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's how much I love food. Like, they had to regulate my intake.
I love the way it tastes, and I think that's probably one of the biggest drivers as to why I got into cooking. Because I'm like, okay, well, two things. One is I can make it, awesome, but two is that from a really young age, my parents encouraged me, or like, it was like a safe space to mix flour and sugar and water and like all these different things and throw it in the oven or put it on the stove and see what would happen, you know? Kind of had an idea of what I was doing, but I just didn't know the ratios or the real recipes. It was a safe space for me to just be a little mad scientist, and that's something that I still carry with me to this day when it comes to cooking and like my approach not only to life but especially to food.
Your profession is a chef, so talk to us a little bit about that. How did you get into it? What did you do? And what's the plan for Chef Pat Noonan?
You know, like, that's really interesting because it's like, I had a conversation with this guy 20 years ago when I first started calling myself chef. I was working in restaurants and stuff, but he was like, I wouldn't consider calling myself a chef unless I had a Red Seal certificate that labeled me chef, which is like, you have to work 10,000 hours to get your Red Seal and go to college and stuff. So for me to call myself a chef, like, sure, like, I have labeled myself that moniker, and I've been around, I don't know if it's 100,000 hours. I have a lot of hours in the kitchen. I really feel that, like, that kind of fucked up my mentality of being like, yeah, I'm labeling myself a chef. First, like, 10 jobs were food jobs.
Oh, wow.
Like, the first restaurant I worked at was the world's most famous restaurant.
Where was that?
McDonald's. You know what I'm saying? Not that I like took it crazy serious or anything like that, but it helped me get my first real kitchen job, which was at a resort at a golf course. And you know, like a lot of many people who started in the kitchen, like, I was predominantly a dish job, a DJ.
Yeah.
You know, cleaning dishes or whatever. But the cool thing is that, like, I think the chefs knew from an early standpoint, like, not only did I come in with a strong base of understanding of food terminologies and the willing to, like, you know, cook and stuff and know what to do with food, but you know, really opened my eyes to like what it really meant to be a chef.
Yeah.
And some of those experiences are, you know, they laid the foundation for me to like take the profession as seriously as I do. But I really decided to like take an overt approach to being a chef. I didn't do the like typical like, okay, I'm just gonna like plunk myself in a restaurant and do it. Always wanted to do things my own way. Always, and that was to my detriment at some points. It was very much marching to the beat of my own drum, and I always knew I wanted to have a cooking show. Always knew, I just knew it. I was just naturally drawn to it, and I saw people like Jamie Oliver, for example. I'm like, you know what? I might not be the chef Jamie Oliver is, but that's what I want to do. That's 100% what I want to do. And that's what I've been working towards for the past 13 years.
Yeah.
I went through a phase where I moved to Mexico for 6 months, and when I was there, I got really sick. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and actually had to come home to Toronto. It was that serious.
Oh, wow.
I was laid up in bed for a month. Yeah, dude, I was at the height of my training. I was 185 pounds of pure muscle, and within the span of 6 weeks, I couldn't eat anything. I was passing blood. My stomach was messed up. I lost 35 pounds in 2 weeks. And it was so bad to the point where I didn't get medevac, but I had to come home on an emergency flight. And from the airport, I was taken it by ambulance to the hospital. Now my point is, it's not about that. My point is that I got myself good in a month and I went back to Mexico and I just started smoking weed like crazy. I really started like creatively coming up with crazy shit, and spliced life was one of the things that I came up with, which was like, how can I take all different kinds of snacks and foods and junk foods and like make them like something really cool. So the Boba Fett White Russian is a spliced life recipe where I'm taking a bubble tea, the brown sugar latte bubble tea, and mixing it with the other ingredients that would make a White Russian to really take it to the next level. Hence, Road to Nostalgia, which is experimenting in the kitchen. And if anybody could take anything from that, is like, yo, don't be afraid to experiment, to fail, to try something that may not work, but you know what? Like, let the idea be outlandish, and then let the context bring you back down to earth.
What got you dabbling with cannabis and food?
Man, like, the fact that cannabis is a mind or consciousness altering substance, I was always really fascinated by it. But not only that, but like the way that it looked. I just thought it would like look like a really cool plant, you know? Man, when I first discovered cooking with cannabis, it was like maybe a year later. I was reading on those random like forum blogs that you could like, you know, make brownies. I heard about brownies, like, okay, how do you do this? I looked into it, I started digging into it, and then I sort of right away started like understanding like, okay, what decarboxylation is, what like how to do this. But it was really ghetto too. Like I was doing it in the microwave with like oil. You know what I mean? Like it was really but it worked, which is awesome, because when it comes to cooking with cannabis, listen, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. There's a very crude ways of doing it, like in the microwave, and then there's very sophisticated ways of doing it. And you know, there's a sliding scale. The cool thing about that is when it comes back to like being a chef, is like one of the biggest parts of being a chef is like when you have all the perfect scenario, it's super easy to cook. It's when like you have to rough it, or you don't have half the ingredients, or it's a mystery basket or whatever, like that's really when like you have to like show your skill set. And so that's the cool thing about cannabis, is like, oh shit, like we don't have all the, you know what, we can still make it work.